Thank you, Elda. That was amazing. Our first reading is Music as Metaphor for Existence by Reverend Richard Gilbert. When discussing how he composed his music, Duke Ellington once said that it was good to have limits. He explained that because his trumpet player could reach certain notes beautifully but not other notes, and the same with his trombonist, he had to write his music within those limits. We live within limits. We compose a life out of finite time. We sing the melody of meaning and cathedraled space, working out a distinctive tune. We walk in harmony with all that is in cosmos and community, seeking to attune ourselves with the music of the spheres, knowing our existence is but a single note in a vast universal symphony. We move in oscillating rhythms, now with bursts of energy, now with the richness of repose, reveling in the variety of the beat, stepping to our own music no matter how measured or far away. We live with dissonance, for concord is not guaranteed. Often we are out of tune, inharmonious, out of step. Dissonance creates its own meaning, moving within the score, providing contrasts that enrich the songs we would sing. Music is the metaphor for existence.
And in light of that, I would invite us to rise and sing hymn number 354, just the first verse. We laugh, we cry. My friend and colleague shared these words this week after watching the Grammys. They were words of the Reverend Terence Strauss. At Bearden High School in 1997, we had a large jukebox in a cafeteria that had been gifted by the class of 1992, I believe. Some of you are wondering what a jukebox is. Some of you missed them. Great songs of the late 80s were the soundtrack to our days as we trudged to and from our classes. And Tracy Chapman's Fast Car was one of my students' favorites, which meant I heard it, was one of the students' favorites rather, which means I heard it daily during my formative years. We've sung it on Sunday services at my church, and for me, it's a precious hymn of class and striving and American heartbreak and escape from oppressive relationships that I have always found heart-opening, haunting, and resilient. I will admit, I was feeling a way that a white male country singer was covering it. But after sobbing my way through that Grammys performance, I am grateful that Luke Combs has delivered the song to new generations, and now Fast Car will live in the hearts of people who probably would never have heard it otherwise. His love for the music, for Tracy's music, and his resurrection of that song are all a beautiful homage to an artist who has aged as gracefully and beautifully as anyone I have ever seen, with not a note lost in her voice, nor a step missed in her guitar performance. I am grateful for his breathing new life into something I thought was just for me and my generation. Can you think of a thing that was too precious to be picked up, transformed, revived, and resurrected by a new generation? An artist, a song, a ritual, an idea, perhaps your understanding of your religious tradition. Here ends our readings. So I asked earlier, when you see something that you don't like about how people are treating one another in the world, what can you do about it? And somebody who did something about it in the last couple of weeks was Elmo. Did anybody catch this? On January 29th, Elmo, the red Muppet, popped up on the platform formerly known as Twitter with this message. Elmo, just checking in. How is everybody doing? If you know Elmo, you're aware that he's often presented as the most empathetic Muppet. He is known for his capacity to care for good or for ill. So the responses flooded in on every social media platform. People unburdened themselves, and Elmo took it all in. His initial post generated 180 million views in a few short days. And initially, the responses were a bit benign and fluffy. Just on my way to buy some balsamic vinegar, came one popular reply, to which Elmo responded, Elmo hopes it's yummy. I'm doing okay, hope you are too, said another commenter, getting the reply, Elmo loves you. And then when Elmo asked the question again, but on a larger platform, things started getting more serious. How are you doing, Elmo asked. Not well, Elmo. They done raised rent and everything. At this point, I'm coming to live with you on Sesame Street. One person wrote, Elmo would love that. #neighbors, the Muppet responded. Elmo, I'm having a tough time. I love you though, said another. Elmo hopes you are doing okay. Elmo loves you today and every day, he replied. People began sharing painful details from their lives, weaving a fabric of pain and fear and anxiety, and they spoke about being tired and broke and unsure how to improve things and feeling disconnected from others. And they were using this red Muppet as a tool to share this way of understanding, to connect. As a user named Becky said, people were trauma dumping so hard on Elmo that the official Sesame Street account had to tweet out mental health resources, adding, God help us. One theme that emerged was people sharing how included and affirmed they felt as adults by this character from a children's television show, caring about what they had to say. Caring for not just the emotional and social well-being of its current viewers, but its former viewers as well. It scratched an itch that some of them didn't know that they had. In many ways, Elmo was performing groundbreaking therapy using that platform. The impact of the question and the inclination to engage is the product of groundwork that was laid by Sesame Street through its almost 55 years of work, because it's always done a lot of work to pair or braid together learning content in the show, interspersed with characters who are trying to figure out how to communicate with one another better, how to understand one another's needs through difference, how to cultivate empathy, how to better understand the world and the people who live in it. They model the challenges of getting along with neighbors and friends, and they allow their young viewers and their older viewers to take in lessons on navigating the social spheres in their lives. For adults, the good feeling nostalgia many of us associate with the characters on Sesame Street enabled us to engage en masse with a simple, no, but really, how are you doing? Culturally, we're not primed to respond to that question with anything approaching authenticity. Fine, we say, chugging along, getting through, doing all right, I'm alive. Even if these responses don't carry the complexity of what we're holding. We're interpreting a social nicety, this greasing of wheels in the public sphere that says when somebody asks us how we're doing, they don't really want us to tell them. They don't want us to burden them with the fullness of our truth. And I wonder why we ever settled into that particular question and response as a standard social nicety. I've experienced how it works differently in other cultures. When I lived in Morocco, that question, if it was asked, or if I asked it more often than not, would set off a long conversation and an opportunity to unburden, and there was gonna be tea involved, and I was gonna be late to wherever it was I was supposed to go. I learned not to ask if I didn't have time to receive a full response. After Elmo's viral post, other Sesame Street characters followed suit. Cookie Monster offered, "Me here to talk it out whenever you want. Me will also supply cookies." Just after that, the Grammys happened, and this meme followed, which I just thought was so beautiful. Just know that when times get tough and you see two sets of footprints in the sand, that's when Elmo and Tracy Chapman were carrying you. An acknowledgement that times have been tough for quite a lot of us, a barometer. I don't actually generally watch awards shows, so I missed the Grammys. I usually wake up the next morning and see if anybody had anything interesting to say. Turns out this year I missed several very extraordinary things. Did any of you watch the telecast of the Grammys? Yeah, so fantastic. There are some. I went through and got it afterwards and watched it because so many things were being talked about. The Tracy Chapman part of it, 35 years after she won Best New Artist, she returned to the Grammy stage for the first time after that first time 35 years ago. And she performed this rendition of Fast Car that Luke Combs had covered earlier in the year. He said he covered it because it was something that he just connected with his youth, with riding in his car with his dad. To him, it was like a favorite song before he knew you could have such a thing as a favorite song. And at the time that he covered the song, I remember a lot of people talking about how they were frustrated that a person who deserves credit for the popularity of this song is not a cis straight white guy who was born a year after Chapman's last Grammy performance. What's of course interesting is that that is a sentiment that I believe Luke Combs agreed with. I didn't even know about the cover until my social media world erupted in outrage, and I didn't understand it. I thought, surely honoring this song by bequeathing it to a new generation or giving it a different genre was a net gain to the original artist. And what's so powerful to me about what Luke Combs chose to do is that he did not change the song. He refused to. He didn't change the pronouns. He didn't change the general feel. It was not a radical retrofit, it was a subtle homage. I have to say that with him not changing the lyrics, said one person, his version resonates with me as a trans-masculine person who came out later in life and now sings baritone. When I heard a man's voice singing as a checkout girl, it just changed something in me. Someone else wrote, "It's not lost on me that a Black queer artist and a white country singer came together to sing a song about belonging. America is starved for connection across divides, and that performance shows how much music has the power to heal. It heals people who live their lives on the outer edges of gender normativity. It heals people who feel disconnected from their communities or who seek new ways of belonging. I believed I could be someone. It healed." Even on stage at the Grammy performance, he took a back seat in that fast car. He looked like he was vibrating with joy at just getting to perform with Chapman, and he was looking over at her the whole time with admiration and affection and awestruck reverence. It's a pretty subtle song, and he let it stay that way. Afterwards, it was clear that the viewing audience had experienced something powerful and beautiful and spiritual and desperately, desperately needed. The audience, whether at home or in person, demonstrated that they were aching souls who were grateful for the opportunity to water the parched ground of their spirits with salty tears. There were a lot of tears shed. And afterwards, it was clear that some form of healing had taken place. It was a rare reminder of music's unique ability to obliterate external differences. It can be about something internal and universal. Fast Car is a song about the wants and needs that make us human, the desire to be happy, to be loved, to be free. In that way, there was something about it that was so beautifully American, at least in the way that America likes to talk about itself. But I don't know if you remember these lines from Langston Hughes, where he says, "America never was America to me." The aspirations of this nation are historically unavailable for so many, while held up as inviolable by those toward whom they tilt. We are doing something called equality, called caring, called giving people inalienable rights. All men are created equal, and they are endowed with those rights. But functionally, for many, those inalienable rights look a little like Job in the Bible, being tested over and over again, being asked to believe in a thing that is being taken away. The Reverend Bill Singford, the former president of the UUA, said, "I hope and pray that our faith can someday fulfill the promise of its theology." That's on a micro level, if we think about the nation as a whole. And thinking about how many aspirational aspects of our lives there are that we have as Americans and as Unitarian Universalists, it feels as though our options are to commit with verbs to our aspirations, or to acknowledge that there is something about those aspirations that is unachievable for us, and to work on the systemic barriers that prevent us from doing anything with verbs towards those aspirations that so much of our founding documents want to have in existence. That's what Langston Hughes was saying when he wrote, "America has never been America to me." But can we recognize that if America has never been America to him, it could never have been America to any of us? It holds inaccuracies in its foundation. And when we recognize that, we have a duty to work on the cracks in that foundation, to look for the flaws in the equation and work towards fixing them. Either the conclusion that we've drawn is wrong, we have done something important, or the variables that we're working with to get to the solution are wrong. We have done these things that are getting us there. One of the things that I loved the most about what happened with the Grammys this week and with Elmo and all of the sort of pop culture stuff that was going on is that it gave us something of a water cooler moment. And we don't actually have many of those anymore. Streaming platforms and different ways of consuming media and ways in which we really disconnect mean that sometimes when we're interacting with people in public, we say, "Hey, have you seen this really amazing thing that changed my life?" And the person says, "No." And all you can say is, "Well, you should." And hope that maybe you'll get a chance to talk about it in the future. We used to socialize about the things that we shared in common. And now to find these unifying cultural moments, we need to go back in time to find songs that transcend our distance from one another. We need to look for different common denominators. So it got me thinking about change, which was what I was talking about last week and what I'm talking about a little bit today as well. Last week, I feel as though I was talking about change as though change is absolutely imperative, we must, although that's not what I meant. That's what was interpreted. What I wanted to say, or what I'm hoping to get at, is that change has a role in our lives when we can be intentional about how we approach it. Because Luke Combs chose not to fundamentally change Chapman's original song, and a lot of people were upset that Luke was getting credit for what they felt should be going to a Black female artist. And then you had Joni Mitchell's piece, which was emblematic of change while also intentionally not including any of the efforts to change it over the years. I don't know if you know that Pete Seeger wrote to her and said, I hope you don't mind, but I wrote an extra verse to that song, and that's how he performed it over the years. She didn't mind, he'd asked permission, and he comes from a folk tradition, so he's used to things being adapted and adopted and moved on. And yet, there's something to be said for not changing something that is somebody's personal experience. When Joni Mitchell sings Both Sides Now, you knew when she sang it when she was in her 20s, and you know when she sings it when she's in her 80s, that it still means something to her personally. And whatever change might have happened as a result of that was not changing the song, it was changing the person singing it. It was changing the people who were receiving it. It was recognizing that over time we might have learned a lot about life, but do we really know that much about life at all? To hear a 20-something sing, "I don't understand life," you feel a certain way. To hear an 80-something person sing, "I don't know about life at all," you feel something completely different. So, I feel the need to clarify something that I said last week and that seems to have been interpreted, which is that I have a position on the potential change in Article 2. And I will say unequivocally from the pulpit, I don't know what I think. I don't know how I believe about what is being proposed in Article 2. I want to be open to conversation and see what happens when we talk about it authentically, earnestly, with an awareness that other people's truths might conflict with ours. I don't know how I plan to vote, but I do know that I want to talk about it. Something else that might have been misinterpreted last week is that the proposed Article 2 changes do not just take our principles and turn them into a graphic, representing something flattened into single words. That's just one part of what's being proposed. That's not what's on offer. So I urge you, if you are interested in exploring more about Article 2, to sign up on that clipboard that I hope is going around, and let us know that you want to take part in a conversation. When I speak about Article 2, the stance that I have taken is that of asking us to stay open to the possibilities and not close ourselves automatically off because of a preference for that which is comfortable. And it crosses every aspect of our lives. Can we hear people out without prejudging them or their ideas? Can we let ourselves have a Grammy moment, braiding together the old and the new, the nostalgic and the luminous now, that we might uncover something deeper and more meaningful through the juxtaposition of our experiences? I hope you know that I know that a preference for what is known and comfortable is not the only reason that people might have problems with the proposed changes. But what I aim to do when I speak about Article 2 is what I believe is a relatively benign ask. Can we stay open to what's on offer and not close ourselves off before we've even had a proper conversation about it? What I'm trying to ask is whether, as individuals, we might look more closely at the values we claim to use to orient our lives, the values that we believe to be fundamental to our daily lives, and ask whether there are ways in which we could bring those values into the world with more clarity, more invitation, more responsiveness, more action, more hope, more meaning. Can we not talk about equality, but instead invite people to put their feet next to ours in a pool? Can we act our best values into being? One of the things that's really beautiful about Joni Mitchell's song, Both Sides Now, and the way in which she sang it when she was in her 20s and the way in which she sings it when she's in her 80s, is that when you don't fundamentally change it, it fundamentally changes itself. It does the opposite thing that you find in some of the most famous biblical stories. The one that comes to mind is Job, where you have this story of affliction, right? Where God is sort of in an egotistical fight with Satan, and they decide to see whether or not Job is truly a believer. And he's met with all sorts of catastrophe. And his friends come along and they don't really understand, and they tell him all sorts of things that are not very helpful. Things like, you must be responsible for your own suffering. Things like, I'm sure it'll get better. The question that the authors were really struggling with is, why does God allow suffering? And then at the end of Job, you get this new voice that comes in and sort of pops a Hollywood ending on it, and then he gets it all back, and more so. Isn't it amazing? It's too easy. That's not how our lives work. That change, that shift into, if you then just stick with it long enough, everything will suddenly make sense. No. And there's a part of me that's glad it was tacked on, because a lot of people that I know have gone through many versions of hell. They go through things so devastating that they know that they will never know joy again. And then sometimes, somehow, they do. Somehow, for so many people, life surprises them and they experience happiness again, and it was worth it to survive. The older that I get, the more I am able to embrace the ambiguity of that, this awareness that you can have a story that ends sadly and then gives you the Hollywood ending, and you can decide where you want it to end. And there's something to be said for a song that cannot change, not get the happy ending that Pete Seeger tried to post on it, and instead just change with the woman, with the times, with the culture, with the audience, with age, and suddenly it has a completely different impact. The point that I really want to make here is that throwing out the binary for now, both sides now, there is merit to looking at things from both sides, multiple sides, all sides. To look back at our life and where we find ourselves now, to look ahead at what things might come to pass after we pass, to acknowledge that things that we hold beautiful and virtuous and lovely can change within our lifetimes, and sometimes change necessarily. To be alive is to be open to the idea that sometimes change is necessary, and sometimes change cannot give us what we need. Sometimes changing just a pronoun is too much change. We have accidentally brought ourselves into a democracy that gives us two options, both sides. They're both sides now, and it invites us to recognize that there might be merit in somebody else drawing different conclusions from the same set of experiences, or radically different ones. And the only way that we can give that merit full weight is to listen and to share authentically from our hearts in what I hope is not a vain hope, that is modeling authenticity and vulnerability, shared feet in a pool, that we might bring more of it into a world and rip out and enable meaningful change. The aspirational aspects of this democracy invite us to send forth. And then if we've done our job as active listeners, and as active listeners who can express our own truth, then maybe we could start to understand that feelings that we have might be shared by other people, feelings that they have might be different from ours, and in order for me to understand anything about the world, I have to know what other people think. The only way that we're going to get closer to understanding anything, understanding ourselves, understanding one another, understanding life, make meaning, is to actively live our aspirations and to live our lives as examples for the world that we wish to bring into being. May we grab that fast car. May we answer questions asked by small children or the Muppets that represent them. May we recognize that we have had the experience of both sides, and so has everyone else. And aren't you curious what they have to say about it? May it be so. Amen.